They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but sometimes it's more satisfying when it's served immediately, with a side of corporate chaos and a garnish of public humiliation. I learned this lesson on a Tuesday morning that started like any other, but ended with me walking out of Meridian Financial Group with a briefcase full of secrets and a heart full of fury. My name is Victoria Hayes, and until 3 months ago, I was the star performer at one of the most prestigious investment firms in Manhattan. I had everything: a corner office on the 42nd floor, a salary that made my college friends green with envy, and a reputation for turning struggling portfolios into gold mines. What I didn't have was respect from the one person whose opinion mattered most: my boss, Marcus Thornfield. The morning everything changed started with champagne. Our team had just closed the Nakamura deal, a $500 million acquisition that had been in the works for 8 months. I'd spent countless nights poring over financial statements, flew to Tokyo 4 times, and personally convinced the Nakamura family that Meridian was the right partner for their expansion into American markets. The deal was my baby, my masterpiece, and according to company policy, it should have earned me a $120,000 performance bonus. I walked into Marcus's office that Tuesday morning, expecting congratulations and a hefty check. Instead, I found him sitting behind his massive mahogany desk, his thin lips pressed into what he probably thought was a sympathetic smile, but looked more like a grimace. "Victoria, sit down," he said, not looking up from his computer screen. "We need to talk about your bonus." My heart sank. In my 3 years at Meridian, I'd learned to read Marcus's moods like a meteorologist reads weather patterns. The slight downturn of his mouth, the way he avoided eye contact, the measured tone of his voice, all signs of an incoming storm. "There's been a decision from the executive committee," he continued, finally looking at me. "Given the current market conditions and the need to redistribute resources, we're adjusting your bonus to $60,000. The words hit me like a physical blow. $60,000, half of what I'd earned, half of what I deserved. I sat in stunned silence for a moment, waiting for him to say it was a joke, waiting for the punchline that never came. "I'm sorry, what?" I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. "I know it's disappointing," Marcus said, his tone as flat as day-old champagne. "But these are challenging times. Everyone's making sacrifices." Everyone's making sacrifices. The phrase echoed in my mind as I thought about Marcus's new Tesla Model S in the parking garage, about the executive retreat in the Hamptons that had cost more than my original bonus, about the renovations to the conference room that no one had asked for but everyone had to pay for through resource redistribution. "This is about the Henderson account, isn't it?" I asked, my voice steadier now, fueled by growing anger. Marcus's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The Henderson account, a $200 million portfolio that I'd been managing for 2 years until Marcus decided to hand it over to his nephew, Bradley, fresh out of Harvard with an MBA and 0 real-world experience. Bradley had promptly lost $40 million in the first quarter, a mistake that had cost the firm significantly and damaged relationships with several key clients. "This has nothing to do with Henderson," Marcus lied smoothly. "This is purely about market conditions and—" "Bullshit," I interrupted, surprising both of us. In 3 years, I'd never once raised my voice in Marcus's office. I'd been the perfect employee, diplomatic, professional, accommodating. But something in me snapped that morning. "This is about you covering for Bradley's mistakes with my money." Marcus's face flushed red. "I don't appreciate your tone. Victoria, you're lucky to be getting anything at all after your attitude lately." My attitude? As if having standards and expecting to be treated fairly was an attitude problem. As if working 16-hour days and sacrificing my personal life for the company was something I should be grateful for rather than compensated for. My attitude? I stood up, my hands trembling with rage. My attitude is what closed the Nakamura deal. My attitude is what saved the Morrison account when Bradley screwed up their quarterly projections. My attitude is what's made this firm more money in the past 3 years than any other associate in the building. "That's enough," Marcus said, his voice sharp. "You're being unprofessional. I suggest you take the rest of the day off to cool down and think about whether you want to continue working here. The threat was clear: accept the reduced bonus and shut up, or find yourself looking for a new job. It was a calculated move, designed to make me back down, to remind me that despite my success, I was still replaceable. What Marcus didn't realize was that by cutting my bonus in half, he'd also cut my loyalty to Meridian in half, and the remaining half was hanging by a thread. I left his office without another word, my mind already racing with possibilities. I went back to my desk and stared at my computer screen, not seeing the emails that had accumulated or the reports that needed reviewing. All I could think about was the injustice of it all, the hours I'd put in, the sacrifices I'd made, the success I'd delivered, all being dismissed with a wave of Marcus's hand and a 50% pay cut. It was then that I remembered the email in my inbox from 3 weeks ago, an email I'd initially dismissed without much thought. Amanda Park, Senior Vice President at Blackstone Capital, Meridian's biggest competitor, had reached out about a potential opportunity. At the time, I'd been too focused on closing the Nakamura deal to give it serious consideration. But now, sitting in my cubicle with my career at Meridian effectively stunted by Marcus's favoritism and Bradley's incompetence, Amanda's email took on new significance. I opened it and read it again. Victoria, I've been following your work at Meridian, and I'm impressed by your track record. Blackstone is expanding our international division, and we're looking for someone with your expertise. If you're interested in discussing opportunities, I'd love to take you to lunch. Best regards, Amanda Park. For the first time that day, I smiled. Not the polite, professional smile I'd perfected over 3 years of corporate life, but a genuine, predatory grin that would have made Marcus nervous if he'd seen it. I picked up my phone and dialed Amanda's number. Amanda Park's office, answered a crisp, efficient voice. This is Victoria Hayes from Meridian Financial. I'd like to schedule a meeting with Ms. Park regarding her recent email. Of course, Ms. Hayes. Ms. Park has been hoping to hear from you. Are you available for lunch tomorrow? I glanced around the office, at the colleagues who'd congratulated me on the Nakamura deal just hours ago, at the building that had been my second home for 3 years, at the life I'd built that was now crumbling under the weight of corporate politics and personal vendettas. Tomorrow would be perfect, I said. The lunch meeting with Amanda Park was everything I'd hoped for, and more. We met at Le Bernardin, a choice that immediately told me Blackstone was serious about their offer. Amanda was a woman in her early 50s, with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She was everything Marcus wasn't: professional, respectful, and genuinely interested in my thoughts and opinions. I'll be direct, she said after we'd ordered. We've been watching your career at Meridian with great interest. Your work on the Nakamura deal was particularly impressive. We know you were the driving force behind that success. I felt a warm glow of recognition. When was the last time someone at Meridian had acknowledged my contributions so directly? Thank you. It was a complex deal, but I enjoyed the challenge. We have a similar challenge at Blackstone, Amanda continued. We're looking to expand our presence in the Asian markets, and we need someone who understands both the financial and cultural aspects of international deals. Your experience with the Nakamura family has convinced us that you're exactly what we're looking for. She outlined the position: Senior Director of International Development, a title that would put me 2 levels above my current position at Meridian. The salary was $200,000 a year, plus performance bonuses that could easily double that amount. But what really caught my attention was the signing bonus, $150,000 available immediately upon accepting the position. I'm flattered by the offer, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But I should mention that I'm currently working on several ongoing projects at Meridian. The transition might be complicated. Amanda smiled, a knowing look in her eyes. We understand that transitions can be challenging. That's why we're prepared to offer you a 6-month guarantee on your position, regardless of any legal issues that might arise from your departure from Meridian. Legal issues? She was referring to the non-compete clause in my contract with Meridian. a clause that would typically prevent me from working for a competitor for 6 months after leaving the company. But Amanda was essentially offering to pay me to weather any legal storm that might arise from my departure. It was a generous offer, almost too generous. "There's something else," Amanda said, leaning forward slightly. "We're aware of the situation with the Henderson account at Meridian. We know that your expertise was overlooked in favor of less qualified personnel. We believe that kind of talent deserves better recognition." The Henderson account. How did she know about that? Unless someone at Meridian had been talking to Blackstone. Someone who was unhappy with how things were being run. Someone who saw the same problems I was seeing but was in a position to do something about it. "I appreciate the offer," I said carefully, "but I'd need to think about it." "Of course," Amanda said. "Take all the time you need, but don't take too long. Opportunities like this don't come around often." I left the lunch meeting with my head spinning. The offer was incredible, far beyond anything I'd imagined when I first opened Amanda's email. But there was something else bothering me, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. The timing was too perfect, the knowledge too specific, the offer too generous. It felt less like a recruitment pitch and more like a carefully orchestrated plan. That evening, I did something I'd never done before. I went through my files at Meridian with a different purpose in mind. Instead of looking for ways to serve the company's interests, I started looking for ways to serve my own. I pulled up client lists, financial projections, strategic plans, and confidential reports. I wasn't planning to steal anything, at least, not yet, but I wanted to understand exactly what I brought to the table and what I might be able to take with me if I decided to leave. What I found was more than I'd expected. Over the past 3 years, I'd been involved in nearly every major deal Meridian had closed. I had relationships with clients that went beyond the professional. I'd been to their children's weddings, their corporate retreats, their emergency board meetings. I knew their businesses inside and out, their strengths and weaknesses, their plans for the future. I was, in many ways, the face of Meridian Financial Group to a significant portion of our client base. I also found something else, a pattern of decisions that suggested Marcus had been systematically undermining my position for months. The Henderson account wasn't an isolated incident. There were other accounts, other opportunities, other successes that had been quietly redistributed to other associates, particularly Bradley, while I was focused on the Nakamura deal. It was a deliberate strategy, designed to diminish my influence and make me more dependent on Marcus's goodwill. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I'd been so focused on doing good work and exceeding expectations that I'd missed the bigger picture. Marcus wasn't just playing favorites with his nephew, he was actively sabotaging my career. The reduced bonus wasn't about market conditions or resource redistribution, it was about putting me in my place, reminding me that no matter how successful I was still just an employee who could be discarded at will. That night, I made my decision. I called Amanda Park's office and left a message accepting the position at Blackstone Capital, but I also made another decision, one that would have consequences far beyond my own career. If Marcus wanted to play games, I was going to show him how the game was really played. The next morning, I arrived at Meridian early, before most of the other associates. I had work to do, and I needed to do it without interruption. I started by making copies of files, not stealing, I told myself, but ensuring I had backups of work I'd contributed to, client contact lists, financial analyses, strategic recommendations, market research, all the intellectual property that I'd developed over 3 years of dedicated service. Then I started making phone calls. The first was to Kenji Nakamura, the CEO of Nakamura Holdings and the key decision-maker in the deal I'd just closed. We'd developed a strong working relationship over the 8 months of negotiations, and I knew he respected my judgment. "Victoria-san," he said warmly when I identified myself. "I was just thinking about you. The board is very pleased with how smoothly the transition has gone." "I'm glad to hear that. Kenji. Actually, I'm calling with some news. I'll be leaving Meridian Financial Group next week to take a position with Blackstone Capital." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "I see. That is, Unexpected news. Will this affect our arrangement with Meridian? Not immediately, I said carefully. But I wanted you to know that if you have any concerns about the transition, or if you need someone familiar with your account, I'll be available at my new position. Thank you for letting me know, Kenji said. I appreciate your professionalism. Perhaps we can discuss this further when you're settled in your new role. The call ended, but I knew the seed had been planted. Kenji Nakamura was a shrewd businessman who valued relationships and consistency. If Meridian couldn't provide the same level of service I'd been offering, he would look elsewhere, and Blackstone would be ready to provide exactly what he was looking for. I made similar calls to 6 other major clients, each conversation carefully crafted to express my availability while avoiding any direct solicitation. I wasn't trying to steal clients immediately. That would have been too obvious and potentially illegal. Instead, I was positioning myself for future opportunities while subtly undermining confidence in Meridian's ability to maintain the same level of service without me. The 4th call was to Patricia Morrison, the CFO of Morrison Industries, whose account I'd saved from Bradley's incompetence just 2 months earlier. Patricia was a no-nonsense woman in her 60s who'd built her company from the ground up and had little patience for corporate politics. "Victoria, sweetheart," she said when I told her about my departure. "I can't say I'm surprised. That boss of yours never struck me as someone who knew how to keep good people. When do you start at Blackstone?" "Next Monday," I said. I wanted to make sure all my current projects were properly transitioned before I left. "Well, I hope Bradley won't be handling our account again," Patricia said dryly. "The boy means well, but he's got the financial sense of a golden retriever. No offense to golden retrievers." I laughed, the first genuine laugh I'd had in weeks. "I'm sure Meridian will assign someone appropriate to your account." "They better," Patricia said, "or they'll be looking for a new client. You know how to reach me when you're settled in." By the time I finished my calls, it was nearly noon. I'd spoken to 8 major clients, planted seeds of doubt about Meridian's future service quality, and positioned myself as the solution to their concerns. It was a carefully orchestrated campaign designed to maximize damage to Meridian while minimizing my own legal exposure. But I wasn't done yet. The real masterstroke came when I remembered something Amanda Park had mentioned during our lunch meeting. Blackstone was looking to expand their presence in the Asian markets, and they needed someone who understood both the financial and cultural aspects of international deals. What she hadn't mentioned was that they were specifically targeting Meridian's Asian clients, using inside information about our relationships and strategies. I opened my laptop and began composing a detailed report on Meridian's Asian market strategy. It included client profiles, financial projections, competitive analyses, and strategic recommendations. Everything Blackstone would need to systematically target our most valuable relationships. I titled it Asian Market Expansion Strategy, a Comprehensive Analysis, and saved it to a flash drive. As I worked, I felt a strange sense of calm. For the first time in months, I wasn't worried about office politics or Marcus's approval. I was focused on the work itself, on the strategic thinking and careful planning that had made me successful in the first place. It was liberating to use my skills for my own benefit rather than for the benefit of people who didn't value my contributions. At 2 p.m., I received an email from Marcus requesting a meeting in his office. My stomach tightened as I read the subject line, "Regarding your future at Meridian." Had he somehow found out about my calls to clients? Had someone seen me copying files? I saved my work, locked my computer, and walked to his office with my head held high. Marcus was waiting for me with a folder on his desk and a serious expression on his face. "Victoria, please sit down. I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, and I want to make sure we're on the same page about your future here." I sat down, my hands folded in my lap, my expression neutral. "I appreciate you taking the time to discuss this further. I want to be clear about something," Marcus said, opening the folder. "Meridian values your contributions, and we want to make sure you feel valued as well. I've been authorized to offer you a revised bonus structure." He slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was a formal offer letter, outlining a new compensation package that included my full $120,000 bonus plus a $20,000 retention bonus, contingent on my signing a new 3-year contract with enhanced non-compete provisions. I stared at the paper, reading the terms carefully. The offer was generous, more than I'd originally expected, but it came with strings attached. A 3-year commitment that would lock me into Meridian and prevent me from pursuing other opportunities. It was a golden handcuff, designed to buy my loyalty and silence. "This is a significant offer," I said finally. "I'm surprised by the company's generosity. We've realized that we may have been too hasty in our initial decision," Marcus said. "Your work on the Nakamura deal demonstrated your value to the firm, and we want to make sure you're properly compensated for your contributions." Your work on the Nakamura deal, not the team's work or our collective effort. For the first time in 3 years, Marcus was acknowledging that I had been the driving force behind a major success. It was validation I'd been craving, but it came too late. "I appreciate the offer," I said, my voice steady. "But I need to be honest with you. I've already accepted a position with another firm." Marcus's face went pale. "Another firm? Which firm?" "Blackstone Capital," I said, watching his reaction carefully. "They made me an offer I couldn't refuse." The color drained from Marcus's face completely. Blackstone Capital was Meridian's biggest competitor, and losing a senior associate to them was bad enough. But losing someone with my client relationships and inside knowledge was catastrophic. "Victoria, you need to understand the implications of this decision," Marcus said, his voice tight with controlled panic. "Your contract includes a non-compete clause that prevents you from working for a competitor for 6 months. If you violate that clause, Meridian will pursue legal action." "I'm aware of the non-compete clause," I said calmly. "I'm also aware that such clauses are difficult to enforce when the employee was constructively dismissed through reduction in compensation and responsibility." It was a bluff, but a calculated one. The law around non-compete clauses was complex, and Meridian would have to prove that my departure was voluntary rather than the result of their own actions. Given the reduction in my bonus and the pattern of decisions that had undermined my position, I had a strong case for constructive dismissal. Marcus stared at me for a long moment, his mind clearly racing through the implications. "What do you want?" he asked finally. "I want what I've always wanted," I said. "To be treated fairly and to have my contributions recognized. But it's too late for that now. My last day will be Friday." I stood up and walked toward the door, leaving the offer letter on his desk. As I reached for the handle, Marcus called out, "Victoria, wait. Let's discuss this rationally. I'm sure we can work something out." I turned back to face him, and for the first time in our professional relationship, I saw genuine concern in his eyes. Not concern for my well-being, but concern for the damage my departure would cause to his career and his reputation. It was a moment of pure power, and I savored it. "There's nothing to discuss," I said. "I've made my decision. I'll spend the rest of the week transitioning my current projects and preparing status reports for my replacement. I assume Bradley will be taking over my accounts." The mention of Bradley's name hit Marcus like a physical blow. We both knew that Bradley didn't have the experience or the client relationships to handle my portfolio. The clients I'd been working with for 3 years weren't going to accept a sudden transition to someone they'd never met, especially someone with Bradley's track record. We'll figure out the appropriate assignments," Marcus said weakly. "I'm sure you will," I said, and walked out of his office. The rest of the week passed in a blur of transition meetings and farewell conversations. My colleagues were shocked by my departure, and several of them asked if I was sure I was making the right decision. I assured them that I was, while privately wondering if they would be asking the same question in a few months when the consequences of my departure became clear. On Friday morning, I received a call from Kenji Nakamura. He was concerned about the transition of his account and wanted to know who would be handling his portfolio going forward. I told him that Marcus would be making those decisions, but that I would be available to answer any questions he might have about the work we'd done together. "I appreciate your professionalism throughout this process," Kenji said, I hope we will have the opportunity to work together again in the future. I hope so too, I said, and I meant it. Patricia Morrison called an hour later with similar concerns. She was even more direct than Kenji, telling me that she was considering moving her account to follow me to Blackstone. I thanked her for her loyalty, but told her that any decisions about her financial management should be made based on what was best for her company, not on personal relationships. By the end of the day, I'd received similar calls from 5 other major clients. Word was spreading that I was leaving, and the clients were worried about the impact on their accounts. Some were politely asking about my availability at Blackstone, while others were more direct about their intention to follow me to my new firm. As I packed up my office that Friday evening, I reflected on the week's events. In 5 days, I'd gone from being a dedicated employee focused on serving my clients to being a strategic weapon aimed at the heart of Meridian Financial Group. It wasn't a transformation I'd planned, but it was one that felt inevitable given the circumstances. Marcus appeared in my doorway as I was boxing up the last of my personal items. He looked haggard, as if he'd aged several years in the past week. Victoria, before you go, I want you to know that I respect your decision. I may not agree with it, but I respect it. Thank you, I said, not looking up from my packing. I appreciate that. I also want to apologize, he continued. I realize that my management style hasn't always been optimal. Perhaps things could have been handled differently. I looked up at him then, seeing something in his expression that I'd never seen before. Genuine remorse. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Perhaps they could have, I said, but it's too late for that now. Marcus nodded slowly. Well, I wish you luck at Blackstone. I hope you find what you're looking for there. I already have, I said, and I meant it. My first day at Blackstone Capital was everything I'd hoped it would be. The office was modern and efficient, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered spectacular views of the city. My new colleagues were professional and welcoming, and Amanda Park took the time to personally introduce me to the senior management team. But the real satisfaction came in the following weeks, as the consequences of my departure from Meridian began to unfold. Within 2 weeks, 3 major clients had moved their accounts to Blackstone, citing concerns about service quality and continuity. Within a month, Kenji Nakamura had initiated discussions about expanding his relationship with Blackstone, potentially bringing over additional business worth tens of millions of dollars. The coup de grace came when Patricia Morrison called me directly to announce that she was moving her entire portfolio to Blackstone. I told that boy Bradley exactly what I thought of his financial projections, she said with satisfaction. I don't think he'll be calling me again anytime soon. By the end of my second month at Blackstone, I'd brought in over $200 million in new business, primarily from clients who had followed me from Meridian. My success was recognized with a promotion to senior vice president and a substantial increase in my performance bonus structure. I was earning more money than I'd ever imagined possible, and I was doing it while working for people who respected my contributions and valued my expertise. But the most satisfying moment came when I heard through the industry grapevine that Marcus had been asked to step down as head of the international division at Meridian. The loss of clients and revenue following my departure had made his position untenable, and the executive committee had decided that new leadership was needed to rebuild the department. I felt a complex mix of emotions when I heard the news. There was satisfaction, certainly, at seeing the man who had undermined my career face consequences for his actions. But there was also a strange sense of melancholy, as if I was mourning the death of the person I'd been when I worked at Meridian. The eager, optimistic associate who believed that hard work and dedication would be rewarded with fairness and respect. That person was gone, replaced by someone harder and more calculating. Someone who understood that loyalty was a luxury that could be withdrawn at any moment. It was a lesson I'd learned the hard way, but it was one that had ultimately made me stronger and more successful. 6 months after leaving Meridian, I was invited to speak at a conference on international finance. The topic was building client relationships in global markets, and I was excited to share my experiences and insights with other professionals in the field. What I didn't expect was to see Marcus in the audience, sitting in the back row with a notebook and a carefully neutral expression. After my presentation, he approached me at the reception. "Victoria, excellent presentation. Your insights on Asian market dynamics were particularly valuable." "Thank you," I said, accepting the compliment while wondering what he was really after. "I wanted to let you know that I've left Meridian," he said. "I'm starting my own consulting firm, focusing on international business development. I was wondering if you might be interested in discussing some potential collaboration opportunities." I stared at him, barely able to believe what I was hearing. The man who had cut my bonus, undermined my position, and threatened me with legal action was now asking me to help him with his new business venture. The audacity was breathtaking. "I appreciate you thinking of me," I said carefully, "but I'm quite happy at Blackstone. We're actually expanding our consulting services, so I'm not sure there would be any opportunities for collaboration." Marcus nodded, his expression revealing nothing. "I understand. Well, if anything changes, please don't hesitate to reach out. I think we could accomplish great things together." As he walked away, I realized that he still didn't understand what had happened. He thought my departure from Meridian was a business decision, a strategic move to advance my career. He didn't realize that it was personal, that it was about respect and recognition, and the fundamental question of how people should treat each other in professional settings. But I understood, and that understanding had made all the difference. I'd learned that loyalty was a two-way street, that respect had to be earned and maintained, and that sometimes the only way to get what you deserved was to go out and take it for yourself. A year after leaving Meridian, I was promoted to Executive Vice President at Blackstone, making me one of the youngest EVPs in the company's history. My division was responsible for over $2 billion in assets under management, and I had a team of 12 associates working under my direction. I'd built something real and substantial, something that belonged to me rather than to someone else's vision of what I should be. The final piece of my revenge came when I least expected it. I was reviewing quarterly reports when I noticed a familiar name in the list of companies seeking new financial representation. Meridian Financial Group was looking for a new banking partner, having lost their primary relationship when their previous partner decided to focus on other markets. I smiled as I read the details of their request. They needed help restructuring their debt, managing their cash flow, and developing new revenue streams. It was exactly the kind of complex, high-stakes project that I'd built my reputation on. And coincidentally, it was exactly the kind of project that Marcus's new consulting firm was presumably designed to handle. I could have recused myself from the decision, passed the opportunity to one of my colleagues, and avoided any appearance of conflict of interest. Instead, I decided to handle the matter personally. I called the number listed in the request and asked to speak to the person in charge of vendor selection. "This is Bradley Thornfield," came the familiar voice. "How can I help you?" "Bradley." Of course. The golden boy who had inherited my accounts and my responsibilities was now apparently responsible for finding solutions to the problems his incompetence had created. The irony was delicious. "This is Victoria Hayes from Blackstone Capital," I said, enjoying the sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "I understand you're looking for financial consulting services." There was a long pause. "Victoria, Yes, we are. We're evaluating several firms for a potential partnership. I'd be happy to discuss how Blackstone might be able to help." I said, "When would be convenient for you to meet?" The meeting took place the following week in Blackstone's conference room. Bradley arrived with 2 other Meridian executives, all of them looking nervous and uncertain. I greeted them professionally, as if we were meeting for the first time, and began my presentation. I laid out a comprehensive plan for addressing Meridian's financial challenges. It included debt restructuring, operational improvements, and strategic partnerships that could generate new revenue streams. It was exactly what they needed, and I presented it with the same level of expertise and attention to detail that had made me successful in the first place. "This is very impressive," Bradley said when I finished. "Your analysis of our situation is remarkably thorough. How did you develop such detailed insights into our operations?" "We make it our business to understand our clients' needs. I said simply. That's what separates Blackstone from other firms in the market. What I didn't say was that I understood their needs because I'd helped create them. Every challenge they were facing, every problem they needed to solve, could be traced back to decisions made after my departure. The loss of clients, the decline in revenue, the operational inefficiencies, they were all consequences of the choices Marcus had made and the culture he'd created. What would be the timeline for implementing these recommendations? Asked one of the other executives. We could begin immediately, I said. However, I should mention that our services don't come cheap. A project of this scope would require a significant investment. I named a figure that made all three men visibly wince. It was high, but not unreasonably so given the scope of the work involved. What made it particularly painful was that it was exactly twice the amount of the bonus that Marcus had cut from my compensation 18 months earlier. That's quite a bit more than we were expecting, Bradley said. Quality consulting services require a significant investment, I replied. But I believe the results would justify the cost. We've had great success with similar projects in the past. The meeting ended with promises to review the proposal and get back to me within a week. I knew they would ultimately decide to work with a cheaper firm, one that would provide adequate but not exceptional service. It was the same mindset that had led to my departure in the first place, the belief that cost was more important than quality, that people were interchangeable commodities rather than unique assets. But that wasn't the point. The point was that I'd had the opportunity to sit across from Bradley and his colleagues, to demonstrate my expertise and my value, and to make them understand exactly what they'd lost when they chose to prioritize politics over performance. The point was that I'd been able to offer them a solution to their problems while making it clear that the solution came at a price they weren't willing to pay. 2 weeks later, I received a formal letter declining Blackstone's proposal. The letter was signed by Bradley and thanked me for my time and expertise while explaining that Meridian had decided to pursue other options. I filed the letter away with a sense of satisfaction, knowing that I'd completed the circle of my revenge in the most professional way possible. That evening, I stood in my office looking out at the city lights, reflecting on the journey that had brought me to this point. 18 months ago, I'd been a dedicated employee who believed that hard work and loyalty would be rewarded with fairness and respect. I'd been naive and trusting, willing to put the company's interests ahead of my own. Now I was a senior executive at one of the most successful financial firms in the city, responsible for billions of dollars in assets and dozens of employees. I'd learned to be strategic and calculating, to put my own interests first, and to never trust anyone else to look out for my career. It was a harder way to live, but it was also more honest and ultimately more rewarding. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Amanda Park, calling to congratulate me on the quarterly results my division had achieved. "You've exceeded every expectation we had when we hired you," she said. "Your success has been remarkable." "Thank you," I said. "I've had excellent support from the company and the team. I'm calling because I wanted to let you know that the board is considering you for promotion to Senior Executive Vice President." Amanda continued. "It would make you the youngest SEVP in the company's history, and it would put you in line for a potential partnership track." Senior Executive Vice President, partnership track. The words carried weight beyond their obvious meaning. They represented not just career advancement, but validation of everything I'd accomplished since leaving Meridian. They were proof that my decision to prioritize my own interests over misplaced loyalty had been the right one. "I'm honored by the consideration," I said. "When would the board make their decision?" "The formal announcement would be at the annual partners meeting next month," Amanda said. "But I wanted to give you advance notice so you could prepare. There will be additional responsibilities, of course, and you'll be expected to take on a more prominent role in business development." After hanging up, I sat in my office for a long time, processing the implications of Amanda's call. Partnership track meant that within 5 years, I could be a full partner at Blackstone Capital, with an equity stake in the firm and influence over its strategic direction. It was a level of success I'd never imagined possible when I was sitting in Marcus's office 18 months ago, listening to him explain why my bonus was being cut in half. The irony wasn't lost on me. Marcus had tried to diminish my value and keep me in my place, but his actions had ultimately propelled me to heights I never would have reached if I'd stayed at Meridian. By treating me as expendable, he'd forced me to prove that I was anything but. By cutting my compensation, he'd motivated me to find opportunities that paid far more than he'd ever been willing to offer. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Victoria, this is Marcus. I heard about your promotion. Congratulations. I always knew you had the potential for great things. Perhaps we could meet for coffee sometime to discuss the industry. I stared at the message for several minutes, amazed by the sheer audacity of it. Even now, after everything that had happened, Marcus was trying to position himself as a mentor who had somehow contributed to my success. He wanted to take credit for my achievements while conveniently forgetting his role in nearly derailing my career. I deleted the message without responding. There was nothing to discuss, no relationship to rebuild, no bridge that could be repaired. Marcus had made his choices, and I had made mine. The consequences of those choices had played out exactly as they should have. 3 weeks later, I was sitting in the Blackstone boardroom, listening to the chairman announce my promotion to senior executive vice president. The room was filled with the company's senior leadership, all of them applauding my achievements and welcoming me to the next level of responsibility. It was a moment of pure triumph, made sweeter by the knowledge of how far I'd come and what I'd overcome to get there. After the meeting, I walked back to my office, now a larger corner office on the 45th floor, and found an envelope on my desk. Inside was a newspaper clipping from the business section, with a headline that made me smile. Meridian Financial Group announces restructuring following client departures. The article detailed the firm's struggles over the past year, including significant losses in their international division and the departure of several key personnel. There was no note with the clipping, but I knew who had sent it. Someone at Meridian, probably someone who had been passed over for promotion in favor of Bradley or who had witnessed my treatment firsthand, wanted me to know that justice had been served. The firm that had treated me as dispensable was now paying the price for their short-sightedness. I filed the clipping away with a sense of closure. The story of my revenge was complete. But it wasn't really about revenge at all. It was about respect, about recognition, about the fundamental principle that people's contributions should be valued and rewarded fairly. It was about the importance of loyalty being mutual, of trust being earned, and of power being used responsibly. Most importantly, it was about the realization that sometimes the best revenge isn't about hurting the people who hurt you. Sometimes it's about succeeding so spectacularly that their treatment of you becomes obviously foolish and self-destructive. Sometimes it's about building something so impressive that their failure to recognize your value becomes a reflection of their own limitations rather than yours. 6 months after my promotion, I received an invitation to speak at a conference on leadership and talent retention. The organizers wanted me to discuss strategies for identifying and developing high-potential employees, with particular emphasis on the importance of fair compensation and recognition. I accepted the invitation, seeing it as an opportunity to share the lessons I'd learned from both sides of the management equation. The day of the conference, I was surprised to see several familiar faces in the audience, former colleagues from Meridian, executives from competing firms, and even some of the clients who had followed me to Blackstone. But the most surprising attendee was sitting in the front row, Marcus's nephew Bradley, now apparently working for a small consulting firm after his departure from Meridian. My presentation focused on the strategic importance of treating talented employees as assets rather than commodities. I talked about the hidden costs of high turnover, the importance of fair compensation, and the long-term benefits of investing in employee development. I didn't mention Meridian by name, but anyone familiar with the industry would have recognized the case study I was describing. The most expensive mistake a company can make, I said in conclusion, is losing talented people to competitors because of preventable management failures. When employees feel undervalued, they take their talents, their relationships, and their institutional knowledge with them. The short-term savings from reduced compensation are almost always outweighed by the long-term costs of lost productivity, damaged client relationships, and diminished reputation. During the question and answer session, Bradley raised his hand. Ms. Hayes, You mentioned the importance of fair compensation. How do companies balance the need to retain talent with the realities of budget constraints and market pressures? I looked at him directly as I answered. The key is to understand that compensation isn't just about money. It's about recognition, opportunity, and respect. Employees who feel valued and appreciated are more likely to stay, even if they could earn more elsewhere. But when employees feel that their contributions are being dismissed or undervalued, no amount of money will retain them in the long term. Bradley nodded thoughtfully, and I wondered if he was finally beginning to understand the dynamics that had led to my departure from Meridian. Whether he was or not, the important thing was that the lesson was being shared with other managers and executives who might be facing similar situations. After the conference, I was approached by a young woman who introduced herself as Jennifer Kim, a senior associate at a major investment firm. Ms. Keru Hayes, I wanted to thank you for your presentation. I'm actually facing a situation similar to what you described, and your words have given me a lot to think about. What kind of situation? I asked. I've been passed over for promotion twice in favor of less qualified candidates. Jennifer said, I'm starting to wonder if I should look for opportunities elsewhere. I studied her carefully, seeing something of my younger self in her expression. What's holding you back? I suppose I keep hoping that things will change, that my work will eventually be recognized. I don't want to seem disloyal. Loyalty is a two-way street, I said, echoing the lesson I'd learned the hard way. You can't be loyal to an organization that isn't loyal to you. The question you need to ask yourself is whether you're being treated fairly and whether your contributions are being valued. If the answer is no, then you owe it to yourself to find a situation where they will be. Jennifer nodded slowly. How do I know if I'm making the right decision? You'll know, I said. Trust your instincts. If you feel like you're being undervalued, you probably are. And if you are, then the right decision is to find people who will value what you bring to the table. 3 months later, I received an email from Jennifer, telling me that she'd accepted a position with a competing firm at a significant increase in salary and responsibility. She thanked me for the advice and the encouragement, and mentioned that her former employer had suddenly become very interested in retaining her once they learned of her intention to leave. Too little, too late, she wrote. Some lessons have to be learned the hard way. I smiled as I read her message, remembering the satisfaction I'd felt when I walked out of Meridian for the last time. Jennifer had learned the same lesson I had, and she was already reaping the benefits of putting her own interests first. As I approached the 2-year anniversary of my departure from Meridian, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed. I was now a senior executive vice president at one of the most successful financial firms in the city, earning more than double what I'd made at Meridian. I had a team of 25 associates working under my direction, and I was responsible for over $3 billion in assets under management. But the most important change wasn't in my title or my compensation. It was in my understanding of my own value and my willingness to insist that others recognize it as well. I'd learned to be strategic rather than simply hardworking, to be calculating rather than blindly loyal, and to put my own interests first when necessary. The final chapter of my story came when I least expected it. I was reviewing proposals for a new business development initiative when my assistant knocked on my door. Ms. Hayes, there's someone here to see you. He says it's regarding a potential consulting opportunity. I looked up from my papers, curious about the unexpected visitor. Did he give his name? Marcus Thornfield, my assistant said. He said you'd know him. I sat back in my chair, surprised by the sudden appearance of my former boss. 2 years had passed since I'd left Meridian, and we'd had no contact since his text message congratulating me on my promotion. What could he possibly want now? Send him in, I said. Marcus entered my office looking older and more worn than I remembered. His expensive suit couldn't hide the fact that he'd lost weight, and there were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. He looked like a man who had been through a difficult period and was still struggling to recover. Victoria, he said, extending his hand. Thank you for seeing me. I know this is unexpected. It is, I agreed, gesturing for him to sit down. What can I do for you? Marcus took a deep breath before speaking. I wanted to apologize for everything that happened at Meridian, for the way I treated you, for the decisions I made that led to your departure. I was wrong. And I've had a lot of time to think about it. I studied his face, looking for signs of insincerity or manipulation. But what I saw was genuine remorse, the kind that comes from experiencing real consequences for one's actions. I appreciate the apology, I said carefully. But I have to ask, what's prompted this visit? Marcus looked down at his hands. My consulting firm isn't working out. I've lost 3 major clients in the past 6 months, and I'm struggling to find new ones. The reputation I built at Meridian has been damaged by what happened after you left. What happened after I left? I asked, though I already knew the answer. The department fell apart, Marcus said quietly. We lost 60% of our international clients within a year. Bradley couldn't handle the responsibilities, and I couldn't rebuild the relationships you'd developed. The executive committee blamed me for the losses, and I was asked to resign. I felt a complex mix of emotions as I listened to his confession. There was satisfaction in knowing that the consequences of his actions had caught up with him. But there was also something resembling pity. Marcus had been a successful executive once, before his ego and his favoritism had clouded his judgment. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, and I meant it. But I still don't understand why you're here. I was hoping you might consider giving me a recommendation, Marcus said. Or perhaps putting in a good word with some of your contacts. I know it's a lot to ask, given our history, but I'm running out of options. I stared at him, barely able to believe what I was hearing. The man who had cut my bonus, undermined my position, and threatened me with legal action was now asking for my help to salvage his career. The irony was so complete that it almost seemed scripted. Marcus, I said slowly, do you understand what you're asking me? I know it's presumptuous, he said, but I also know that you're a better person than I was. You have the power to help me, and I'm hoping you'll consider it. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city while I considered his request. In the reflection, I could see Marcus sitting in his chair, waiting for my response with the desperate hope of a man who had run out of alternatives. 2 years ago, I said without turning around. You cut my bonus in half to cover for your nephew's mistakes. You undermined my position, dismissed my contributions, and made me feel like I was expendable. When I came to you to discuss the situation, you threatened me with legal action and suggested I take the day off to cool down and think about whether I wanted to continue working at Meridian. I remember, Marcus said quietly. Do you also remember what I told you when you offered me a revised compensation package to stay? You said it was too late. I turned back to face him. It was too late then, and it's too late now. I'm not going to help you rebuild your career, Marcus. Not because I'm vindictive, but because I don't believe you've learned the lessons you needed to learn. You're here asking for help because you need it, not because you genuinely understand what you did wrong. Marcus's face fell, but he didn't argue. He simply nodded and stood up to leave. I understand. Thank you for your time. Marcus, I said as he reached the door, can I give you some advice? He turned back hopefully. Of course. Stop trying to rebuild what you had and start building something new. You made mistakes, but that doesn't mean you can't recover. It just means you need to do it differently this time. And most importantly, you need to do it yourself. Marcus looked at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You're right. I've been trying to go back to the way things were instead of moving forward. Thank you for the advice. After he left, I sat in my office for a long time, processing the strange encounter. Seeing Marcus in my office, reduced to asking for help from someone he'd once dismissed, was the final validation of the choices I'd made. But it was also a reminder that revenge, even when it's justified, comes with its own costs. I'd won, but winning had required me to become harder and more calculating than I'd ever intended to be. I'd learned to protect myself, to put my own interests first, and to never trust anyone else to look out for my career. These were valuable lessons, but they'd also changed me in ways that weren't entirely positive. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Amanda Park, calling to inform me that the board had approved my promotion to the partnership track. Congratulations, Victoria. You've earned it. Thank you, I said. I won't let you down. I know you won't, Amanda said. You never do. As I hung up the phone, I realized that Marcus's visit had actually been a gift. Not because of anything he'd said or done, but because it had reminded me of how far I'd come and how much I'd accomplished. I was no longer the naive associate who had believed that hard work and loyalty would be automatically rewarded. I was now a senior executive who understood the rules of the game and knew how to play them effectively. But more than that, I was someone who had learned to value herself appropriately and to insist that others do the same. That was the real victory. Not the money or the title or the corner office. It was the knowledge that I would never again allow anyone to treat me as expendable or to diminish my contributions for their own benefit. That evening, I stood in my office one more time, looking out at the city lights and reflecting on the journey that had brought me to this point. Tomorrow, I would begin the next phase of my career as a partner track executive, with all the responsibilities and opportunities that came with it. But tonight, I was content to simply acknowledge how far I'd come and how much I'd learned along the way. The story of my revenge was over, but the story of my success was just beginning. And this time, I would be the one writing the rules.